I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us a brand new guest, and you're going to want to hear his take on things. It's a little different than what you've seen and heard in the past. This is a former Wall Street executive, a CEO actually, a Wall Street guy, understands finance. He is a multifaceted analyst. He understands, as I said, finance. He understands geopolitical. He does analysis on earth changes and trends, big trends coming our way. And I'd like to welcome Warren Pollock. Warren Pollock, thank you for coming to us from Long Island, New York.
It's great to be here, Greg.
Well, just a little bit more on your resume here. Back in 2001, August of 2001, you were pinging Wall Street about having, offsite backup, for all the data, in case some catastrophe happens. Well, of course, bing, 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 everybody knows what happened the next month, 9/11/2001. In 2003, you predicted, there's going to be a big market crash in 2008, and you predicted the Fed and the powers that be will print tons of money to try to fix it. You were correct again. So you have a notable track record that you can find on the internet about your big predictions, big trends. And I want to just start with what you said to me in the pre-interview when I was talking to you about, hey, what do you think is going to happen, in the next year, in the next year and a half? What do you think is going to happen? And you said, quote, the damage control is going to wear off. Explain that.
Well, if we look at the role of the President of the United States, his primary role is to be the public relations officer for the status quo. And around the turn of the Bush administration, as that administration failed, there was a lack of damage control. And we're going to see the same thing as Obama leaves office, timed to the end of 2015, because there's a tremendous amount of effort to protect vested interest that goes on within the White House. And they'll do anything to stop things from being unglued. And they're doing this on a day-to-day basis. And the moment they stop, or there's a pause, or contention, or lack of consensus, then it's most likely at that point that things will become unhinged and unglued. And I could assure you that the next president of the United States, be they Republican or Democrat, I think is going to be known for a great failure. It will be the person, he or she will be the person held responsible for, I think, the total decline of the United States.
You think that'll come after 2016, not
Correct.
Before? There's a lot of people saying that this thing blows up before Obama leaves the White House.
It will start to become unhinged, I think, in the next election cycle at the end of 2015. And what we're going to see is a tremendous amount of rationalization. If you look at things the way they are today, everyone denies that there was a financial crisis. Everyone denies that Fukushima existed. Everyone denies that the U.S. government is insolvent. Everyone denies the fact that there are global imbalances between the U.S. and China. And all of these elements of denial are really rationalization. So the facts have changed around everyone's outlook, which has remained static and the same. And that's why things have this appearance of normalcy. However, I think things will become more surreal around the end of 2015.
Do you think that means that people will say, hey, we really don't? I mean, they just announced last week that we had 3.5% growth last week in the third quarter. And I'm thinking, they got 3.5%. How did they come up with that number? I mean, is this part of the spinning, the damage control, to say, hey, look, we're growing, and they're really not?
That's right. And all statistics now are hedonic. They are not meaningful. And most of the news that you listen to is not meaningful.
When you say hedonic, when you say hedonic, you mean that they are massaged, they're gimmicked up.
Totally gimmicked up, totally massaged, and it's very hard to look back and try to draw conclusions on artificial numbers that you might construct as a proxy for reality. For example, you could see government figures. You have to adjust them in such a way as to back out all of the discrepancies. It's almost an impossible task. And in the United States, just the compiling of statistics is biased. It's incredibly artificial, not meaningful. We have whole statistical areas such as M3, which were discontinued, or was it MCM that was discontinued? But you have whole data sets which are totally ignored. And that's part of the damage control on the part of the establishment or the vested interest. It's not just Washington that's at issue here.
And you're saying that with the damage control wear off, then somewhere by in the election cycle, when it starts heating up next year, people say, hey, we really don't have growth. We really don't have a recovery. Things really aren't so great. And that you're saying that it becomes apparent that they're lying.
Well, I think to a few people it's apparent that the great lies are getting greater and greater and greater. The fact is that no one has ever called on a lie. And you have sort of these compounding lies, one upon the other, and it makes any kind of reformative action impossible. If you don't start from a basis of truth, then you cannot have any kind of meaningful policy or any kind of reform, because you're basing your solutions, quote solutions, on a lie. So the solution frequently is worse than the problem. And all of the government programs which you see being enacted are really working against your interest as a citizen and as a person that lives on this earth or in this world. So every single policy which may be sold to you as being in your interests is really working against your interest. And you have to really detach yourself from all of these government initiatives and government programs. The closer you are, the more hurt you will become over a period of time.
Well, explain that again. The closer you are, the more hurt you. The closer you are to the government. Is that what you're saying? To the government policy?
That's what I'm saying. The more reliant that you are on them. For example, all of the programs that you see, let's say
food stamps,
global warming programs, climate change programs, not using coal, for instance, New York Rising, hurricane aid, any kind of government program which you think is working in your interest, Republican or Democrat, will be working against your interests. And the closer that you are to these government programs, the more dependent you are on them, and the less flexible you become in sort of a catastrophic failure to follow.
You know, Alan Greenspan was just out recently, and he said, I don't know if you saw this or not, but he said something to the effect of that, it's going to be very painful, very disorganizing, very, very difficult to stop the QE. They said they stopped the QE last week. Come on. If they stopped the QE, the bond prices would be going up. But hold on. And he said, it's going to be very difficult, and that he told people to buy gold. Alan Greenspan, the former Fed chairman, out publicly telling people you should buy gold. I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, you definitely need, first of all, you need a stack of $20 bills to withstand any kind of dislocation that comes your way, because that's a tool which you can use in sort of a dislocation. It's something which people perceive as having value, and that perception is what money is all about. So with the $20 bills, a stack of them, I would say 100 or 200 of them, 100 per week for a 4-week period. If you have that many $20 bills, you will be able to buy yourself probably out of any kind of crisis situation in the short term.
You were up in Long Island, and gold, silver, people didn't understand it, but they understood a $20 bill. You were telling me that in the pre-interview. Is that where you're coming up with that? Some other people have said the same thing. You need some cash. You don't just need gold or silver. You need some cash because people will understand it. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, because if you have a $20 bill, a piece of silver, and a piece of gold, and the other guy has a loaf of bread, the guy will take the $20 bill, or he'll take your $1,300 piece of gold. But you'll have to educate him about silver. So you don't want to lose the value of your gold in trade. So you can use the $20 bill, and it will have a perception of having value at the early stages of crisis. And then gold and silver will have a transitional value. It's really sort of pointless to think about the dollar amount of these assets. The idea is that you have a monetary density in gold. It can be carried with you. It can be negotiated. You can negotiate the price. And during the hurricane, you were able to sell your gold, but you were not going to be able to obtain the best price for your gold. So people that understood what gold was, such as jewelers or individuals, would lowball you, and you would be unable to negotiate a good price in trade for your gold. But it's a kind of density that you want, because we're looking at very large events in the future, and gold might be actually transportable enough for you to retain your wealth
through
any kind of valley.
And we're going to get to that in your future casting here in just a little bit. But what do you make of Alan Greenspan saying that all of a sudden, excuse me, buy gold? What do you make of that?
Well, my thinking is that the quantitative easing was put in place to allow China an exit strategy away from U.S. paper. So the idea of quantitative easing is to buy debt and make all debt of short duration. And if you think about it, if a debt gets, let's say, 1-year notes have to be renewed every single year. So a long holder of U.S. paper, such as China, can transition to a short holder of U.S. paper. And that would allow them to exit on a whim. So the next target for this paper mache or paper exchange or wallpapering is probably Japan, which is an economic and ecological basket case. So we will basically trade paper with Japan infinitely. And they'll use Japan, I think, as an off-balance sheet dumping ground. And likewise, Japan will use the U.S. as an off-balance sheet dumping ground. And this sort of sets up for the next war as well, where you see the U.S. and Japan closely paired.
And I want to bring up the war thing. Something you said in the pre-interview that we're not going to go to war with Russia. No. We're going to team up with Russia, and we'll be fighting China. Is that? Could you explain that?
Well, I think if you look at Russia, one of my predictions actually on CBS News was that there was going to be a U.S. oil glut, and at the time, the host of CBS News just couldn't believe what I was saying. And the key to me, or the piece of information which led me to that conclusion, was the reversal of some key pipelines running from the Gulf of Mexico to the Midwest. So vested interest, or the oligarchy, or inverted totalitarianistic state, reversed those pipelines in advance of the factual change as to where the oil was located. And if you notice, there was a recent discovery in partnership with the Russian oil company and ExxonMobil, which was made in the Russian Arctic region. And basically, this tension with Russia is in part to keep oil away from the market, Russian oil out of the marketplace. And if you look at Russia,
so Ukraine, the price doesn't collapse even more than it is now.
Doesn't even collapse even more. If you think about it, you have all the instability in South Syria, the Ottoman Empire, what used to be the Ottoman Empire, then it was the British Empire, then it was the U.S. Empire. And now without empire, again, that area is unstable. And a lot of that oil is offline. And that was key to Turkey. If you thought about Iraq, that was a key oil supplier to Turkey.
Oh, they want that oil offline. They don't want that oil.
They don't want that oil
because they want to keep the price high.
They want to keep the price high. And there's almost an endless amount of carbon-based energy because carbon is a common element on Earth. It's just logical. It's just that the regions that are readily accessible, such as Texas or the Persian Gulf, those are somewhat depleted. But all of the areas north and in the oceans, that is totally undepleted. And that's where all the discoveries are. So when you look at a country such as China, which has a manifest destiny in the South China Sea, it also has a tremendous amount of people to keep stabilized and a tremendous resource demand. So it would be logical for China to refight a war, let's say, with Russia for northeastern Russia.
And you think that we will team with Russia to fight China?
Definitely. And there's no doubt about it, because China's main motivating force is to keep stability within that nation. And in order to do so, they do a lot of different things. And the change in China came with Tiananmen, where the sort of Politburo decided to change tack in response to a potential instability, a revolutionary instability. And China is always one day away from that kind of instability. And if you look at the history of China, you could see it joined as an empire, collapsed, joined again, collapsed again, fighting wars with its neighbor, being occupied by Japan, having a war with Vietnam, and they're having a war with Russo-Japanese war as well. There are tremendous amounts of instability, and that whole area is sort of a land empire. If you look at Western Europe all the way to the east, and then Africa, that entire area could be traversed by land. And that's where the contentions are all going to occur. And then you have a sea empire, the United States, and to a lesser extent, you will see China, and to almost no extent, Russia. And you will see contention there as well. And Japan and the U.S. are going to be allies. I mean, first they're allies economically. Their policies align. They're the only two countries that actually align these days. The United States used to have a tremendous number of allies and had common interests in Europe. But the only remaining stalwart ally right now is Japan.
And I want to talk to you, I want to move on to inverted totalitarianism. And you brought that up in the pre-interview, and I thought, oh, wow, that's in other words, it's inverted in a way that it's a system. It's not Stalin or Hitler or Mussolini or somebody you can, or Ho Chi Minh or somebody you can knock off. It's a whole bit of system. Explain inverted totalitarianism.
Well, that's a term by Sheldon Wallen, and it really describes the current system of government that's operable in the United States. If you look at Putin in Russia, it's a classic feudal system. But if you look at the United States and most of the rest of the world, there's sort of a fuzzy leadership consisting of vested interests, corporations, governments, lobby groups, deep pockets, and these are all points of rule, or all the leadership caste within the United States and the world. And through this mechanism of globalization, we have in place a totalitarianism that cannot be attributed to any individual. It's truly inverted. You can't, pull the leader out of the White House and lynch him. It will have absolutely no effect. Your presidents are absolutely interchangeable. Your Congress is absolutely interchangeable and unaccountable. And you can address, you could pull the whole leadership out of Brussels or out of parliaments in Europe, and it will have no effect on the leadership caste that's currently in place.
So where does this Ebola thing fit in? They won't institute, a quarantine. They won't institute a travel ban. It's like a circus. You have governors in states like in New Jersey and Illinois and New York saying they should have a quarantine. You have the Obama White House looking almost like they're inept or incompetent, or some people say it's too stupid to be stupid, that they want to cause an infection, and it's just the Ebola circus. And every day there's a new revelation. We are quarantining our troops in Italy. The people in Italy are upset. But the Obama administration doesn't want to do any quarantine. It doesn't want to, quote, shut off the world. Where does Ebola fit in? What's your take on that?
Well, your perceptions, you're perceiving something that's becoming surreal. So the reaction that the vested interest or the government or the inverted totalitarianistic system is having to Ebola is a surreal response. It's not logical. It doesn't make sense. And then when you have governors such as Christie and Cuomo who cross ideological lines and then they decide to do the right thing, you see that what they're doing is immediately vetoed to someone else's interest. And that's how this inverted system currently works. And Ebola really provides an example of how devastatingly dangerous inverted totalitarianism is. And
why are they doing it? Do they want to infect us? Do they want to have America go down? A lot of people think they want America to be infected and destroyed, and I don't know. It doesn't seem like it fits in with inverted totalitarianism, or does it?
Well, people want to see their rice bowl preserved, their living preserved, the ability to make profits worldwide and internationally, to loot. And those are all the motivating forces to keep your job, to rationalize the problem. These are all the motivations within this large organization that you have to keep the status quo in place. And the status quo is very inflexible. It's what I would call momentum. So the momentum to keep trade open with Africa, to keep the airports open, to keep the corporate ties to Africa open are so great that it overrules common sense. However, I think in the long run, if you look at Ebola, you have to understand that the media is being controlled, by 4 or 5 of these corporations that are also part of the oligarchy. They're part of this inverted totalitarianistic system. And these 4 or 5 corporations are framing the news. And when you look at the statistics of Ebola, so far, I think about 4,000 people or so have been killed. And although there might be potential to spread this disease with irresponsible doctors running around Manhattan to bowling alleys and to eateries, on balance, this is a very low statistical risk, even though the ramification could be potentially great. So numerically, it's insignificant, and it's probably of no threat to you personally. However, the way that it's being sold to you is in the interests of vaccine makers, of also a whole array of corporations, a large number of politicians, and you're being programmed into a response where you are playing your role as the consumer. And consumerism is the primary ideology of America and most of the globe. The American dream is not about Democrats or Republicans. The American dream is about consumerism. And that consumerism has spread globally, and it's become sort of the carrot without the stick for everyone to spend money aimlessly to consume, and through consumption, providing consent to the totalitarianistic system which is in place.
Couldn't this backfire? Let's say it's not a real, a widespread, millions of people killed by Ebola, but the thought, people think, well, I'm not going to go to the mall. I'm not going to go out to dinner. I'm not going to go shopping. I'm not going to go to the movies. I'm not going to go to the theme parks. I'm not going to go to Times Square. Or could that backfire and cause the economy to implode, and we could lose this 3.5% third quarter growth in a hurry? Could that backfire?
I sincerely doubt it. However, it may affect airlines or airfares or flights. However, think of all the jobs which are being created right now because of Ebola. Think of all the government workers that now have something to do. Think about the millions of dollars which can now be spent to counter Ebola. Think of all the laws and regulations and quarantines and protective actions and justifications can be given for any kind of draconian action. So that's inverted totalitarianism at work. That's what you're seeing here with Ebola. Now, the American populace is a victim, and it is giving its consent to being victimized in response to the news cycles and the promulgation of information. All information now is frankly meaningless. And, I mentioned to you in the notes that Wikipedia is an example.
Not this information. This information is actually telling people what's going on.
Well, you and I are on the fringe. So, we're not really aligned with, I think, the mainstream or even the alternate media. I mean, for me, I've taken a step back, and that step back allows me to think about things.
You're not, and just so people know, if you try to Google you won't find your website. You took it down. It wasn't taken down. You have just pulled back. You're making a lot less appearances on CBS or, CNBC or alternative media, Max Kaiser, whatever. You're just pulling back and to take a look. So just so people know that you've done this just to get away from the system. Is that right?
That's right. And I think you could become a monk or a martyr. And imagine that you're standing in a room and the facts are changing around you. I mean, it's a Pompeii moment, and the volcano is about to explode.
And that's what I wanted to bring up next, the Pompeii type of event. Tell me what you are predicting, what you are forecasting in your Pompeii type of event, which sounds devastating to me.
Well, I think the first part of that event is rationalization. And that was part of my motivation for pulling down some of my internet presence. But because imagine that you're standing in Pompeii right before this volcano is about to explode. And all the people around you are saying, this volcano, it's not going to be a problem for us. That's rationalization and dissonance. That's what's happening right now. That's why people are talking about the economy, even though the bomb of the economy has gone off. The financial crash already occurred. That's why people are still voting Republican and Democrat. That's why people are still reading newspapers. So people are right now in Pompeii. The volcano is about to explode. And you really can't have a discussion with the people around you. Your best avenue is to realize that the volcano is going to explode and then try to escape the situation. So you could become a monk and sort of pull away, or you could become a martyr and stay there in Pompeii, trying to convince your friends that the volcano is going to go off any minute. So as far as humankind is concerned, I think that we are at the end of an age or a long cycle, which started around the U.S. Revolution in time to the invention of the steam engine. It's when mankind started to use carbon-based energy. The energy density that human beings could use vastly increased. And we've seen a parabolic rise in the population and also in our technology along those lines. So we're going to roll into anything that's parabolic is unsustainable. You've guessed, like I think Gregory Mannarino, that's talked about that kind of chart.
Yes,
Don
Harold about
talk
how
about
the
that.
economy, took off, and so did the population. Basically
Exactly.
we had all this engineering and innovation, and everything went up, and all this debt. And he says, when it blows up, when the debt bubble pops, when it finally ends, you're going to see a corresponding crash in the population because people are going to die.
That's what I think. And a financial analyst sees a chart, but the longer the chart is, the better information that you have. So if you look at the chart of mankind from its dawn to the present age, you'll see mostly it's been a flat line. The Roman era basically was a great increase in technology. Thereafter, it plummeted. And then we sort of discovered an efficient way to use carbon-based energy. And that energy density allowed the great amount of complexity and technologies within our society to develop very rapidly. Because if you read a book from someone like Buckminster Fuller, who was born in the early 1900s, then you could see how he's described the great improvements and advancements in life and living, which you and I take for granted. All that's layers of complexity that have been put into place to really simplify things. But in the process, it's become a very fragile system. And we're going to see that parabolic rise become unsustainable. And then instead of people realizing that the volcano, Pompeii, is going to go off, they're going to rationalize just the same way that they did during that volcanic event. And if you ever visit there, you could see people frozen into their houses in stone. And that is the human being. That's a human element, the human reaction to any kind of change. And that's what we're seeing occur. And the totalitarianistic system that's in place is totally inflexible to change. It's been using all sorts of game playing, globalization, labor arbitrage with China, quantitative easing. All of these games are there to extend the life of an era which has really ended. And we're going to have this great dissonance and denial period. And then we're going to have an abyss. Most likely, we're going to see large ecological events, also events that relate directly to war, loss on life. And the only parallel that I could draw is the experience that the Soviets had during World War II. So you take the Soviet population, the number of people they lost per day, extrapolate that, and then in the United States, it amounts to something like 70,000 people dead per day for a 5-year period. And on a human being numeric, statistical standpoint, it means a loss of life expectancy from 5 to 25 years, depending on your age. So we have rationalization, an abyss, and after the abyss, we have either a dark age or a renaissance. And I definitely see some renaissance technologies that are being developed presently. However, the way that things have been structured is any of these great finds or benefits, the finding of oil in the Arctic, the technological changes that we're seeing, you are never going to be the beneficiary of those improvements.
Under this current system.
Under the current system. The system will block any new technology. It will block any innovation. And if you look at California, California has some innovation, but look how far they had to be from Washington to accomplish that.
So you think that what's the best way people can protect themselves? Do they are the preppers crazy, or are they insignificant? Are the changes so big that you're not going to be able to do anything about it, or can you help yourself?
Well, I think you could always help yourself. I think you could help yourself by being alert, by being flexible, by being aware that you might only be able to carry things on your back. That might be what is required of you in a type of a change situation. We're talking about a very long adjustment because the chart is very long. We're looking at a chart that started with James Watt in 1776. And before that, Thomas Newcomen, who didn't perfect the steam engine but invented it. So that's a very long trend. So the adjustment period is also very long. And most people are looking for immediacy. And that's the way the news has been structured and the information has been structured. It's been structured to divide people and to balkanize people and to provide them with information on an immediate basis, but that information is not meaningful.
On a long-term basis.
On a long-term basis.
Exactly.
And it's also not truthful. It's so inaccurate. Even Wikipedia is more a means of control than it is actually a source of information.
Yeah. Well, maybe people can, do something. Big changes are coming. And thank you for giving us your multifaceted analysis here on USA Watchdog. I think a lot of people are going to like and be amazed at your take on things. I know I was, and that's why I booked you. Warren Pollock, thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg.